I'm Neil Smith. I'm the Inclusive Design Lead for HS2, and what I'd like to take you through is tools for inclusive design to actually give a flavour of an approach to inclusive design that I've been working through and developing over years, and how to apply that to a major project. Firstly, I'd like to reflect on this quote: actions can be accessible and inclusive, but might not necessarily be sustainable. However, no sustainable actions can proceed without being accessible and inclusive. This is a quote I came across many years ago and has influenced my approach to inclusive design, because I think the core of inclusive design is sustainable development, socially sustainable development. And if we don't actually factor people in appropriately within our approach, then in reality we aren't being sustainable. And so it's been a key tenet. In terms of HS2, just to reflect why inclusive design is so important to us, I mean, HS2 will be the new backbone of Britain's rail network, and the first new intercity railway north of London in over 100 years, and Europe's largest infrastructure project. And I think with the scale of the project comes a responsibility. We will have an impact on people's lives, and we need that impact to be a positive one. And if we are not inclusive within our approach, and if we just did the normal, the day-to-day, I don't think we will be acting appropriately. It's important that we consider how to integrate inclusive design into our whole process. We will touch on half of the British population, covering 25 stations. In the northwest, that's say home to 7 million people. In the northeast, there's home to over 2.5 million people. Our impact on those areas and the regeneration that will come out of that needs to have an inclusive design approach to be really, in my mind, meaningful. That is why HS2 is putting people at the centre of our approach, and we're doing this in various ways. We have a design vision, and that design vision clearly sets out that we're to design for everybody, but I think that's a very useful tool and sets out our approach. But actually, it's our inclusive design policy which is the most important piece within our work. Our policy is our commitment to acknowledging diversity and difference between individual users. And it's also clearly setting out within our policy that we're not just talking about our stations, we're talking about the whole infrastructure programme. That's the line-wide infrastructure, that's the technical areas, it's the depots, that's the workplace setting. It's all the people that are involved in HS2 are encapsulated within that policy. That policy sets out how we'll deliver that, how we'll develop our technical standards and achieve our design vision. And within that, it's recognising that this is an evolving process and we need to engage with people. So it sets out, our policy sets out how we'll engage with user groups. It sets out how we recognise our responsibilities under the public sector equality duty, and how our design has to reflect on age, disability, gender reassignment, pregnancy, maternity, religion, a whole broad raft of issues that we need to consider about when we're designing and constructing, delivering and then managing, how that follows through all the processes. And I think it's also important when we talk about disability to understand that I think everybody, we see the international symbol of disability, and we're aware of, many people think of people who have long care units who are blind or partially sighted or deaf or hard of hearing, but actually there are many other disabilities that are overlooked and need to be considered as part of the design process. So looking at neurodiversity, cognitive processing, hidden conditions such as incontinence or epilepsy, considering the impact in the built environment on mental health. So these are things that we need to consider within our design approach. So the tools to use on that I think really come from 2012. I think I've been working in the field of inclusive design for over 20 years now, and definitely when I started working, very much was approach of when we looked at this subject, it was designing for the disabled, designing for other people, and not designing for ourselves. With 2012, we made a commitment as a country to deliver the most accessible games ever. And that gave us an opportunity to actually think about what that meant. And out of that, there was a commitment to deliver an inclusive games and using the definition of inclusive design developed by CABE, which touched on faith, religion, age, social circumstance. And the Olympic Delivery Authority developed a design strategy based around that, and I was involved in writing the design standards that supported that. And with the design standards, when we looked at what we had within British standards or what we had within building regulations, we were very disability focused, and we wanted to broaden that out. So we started within design standards to talk about provision for families, recognising the requirements of different faith groups, how that possibly needed to be integrated into the design process, recognising that it wasn't just how we were going to design it, but how we were going to move through the design details. So we set up a conformance process. So the designers at each stage had to demonstrate how they were meeting those criteria. I think the intent and the policy is the most important thing, but it does have to be measurable. It does have to be able to be demonstrated that it's being achieved. So having a consistent design standard and an approach to it helped all the different design teams understand what we were trying to achieve with the design standards and design policy, and then put that into practice. And that then moved on to the legacy of the games. We had the London Legacy Development Corporation. They integrated their design strategy that set out quite clearly at each REBA stage how they wanted their design standards to be implemented, how they would consult with their built environment access panel, how this would be recorded, and how we would then put that into to reflect on that and review it at each stage. They adopted the 2012 design standards, and they were finally revised last year. They've got the new inclusive design standards, which have reflected on 7 years of delivery within the Olympic Park, and they've taken within their standards an approach that is not just focusing on the built environment, but is actually talking about creating inclusive neighbourhoods, looking at an approach to inclusive design from a large-scale strategic approach to master planning, not just the minutiae, and thinking about how we set out the whole of the scheme from design brief through to delivery. I think one of the things that historically accessibility has been perceived as a detail. It's a Part M issue that is delivered by the architectural team, but actually it's not. It is implicit within the design brief and concept, and is much broader than a detail. And it has to, as it did with 2012, change the way we make design decisions. Inclusive design changed the approach that we had to the whole topography of the infrastructure. You know, the Olympic Park was a complex beast. We had lots of canals, railways, rivers to overcome, and deliver not just the games, but development parcels for new communities in the future, and how usable that network of routes would become was vital to its success. And inclusive design was at the core of that. London, obviously, the planning policy that was in place at the time drove a lot of decision making, and London has learned from delivering the games as well. And in 2014, the supplementary planning guidance I wrote for the mayor reflected on what we'd achieved with the games and started to apply that learning to a citywide approach. Giving I think, giving the tools for large-scale developers, small-scale developers, local authorities, the planning teams to help deliver the Mayor's commitment to delivering inclusive environments and the practical tools for delivering that. And that wasn't just something that was being delivered from the a public sector. One of the biggest developments that is still being delivered within London is the Brent Cross and Cricklewood development. And at the core of that, there was a commitment by the development partners to deliver an inclusive design strategy and a consultation forum that would be part of the ongoing development, and that will be reviewed throughout the lifetime of that development, and really helping address the needs of the new communities that development was creating. And we were able to talk about how that was being delivered within the supplementary planning guidance to demonstrate how that could be brought forward. At the same time, we've got Network Rail. Many of the colleagues who'd worked on 2012 moved to Network Rail, and Network Rail set up its Built Environment Access Panel. It set up its inclusive design strategy and demonstrated how throughout the rail infrastructure how we were going to follow on what we'd achieved in 2012. And at the same time, the government was pushing forward to deliver on inclusive design, and the industry signed up to an inclusive design action plan. So we had REBA, RICS, CIC make a commitment, and the CIC actually took on the responsibility of delivering the Paralympic Legacy Programme and an inclusive design agenda. And one of their key publications has been the Client's Guide for Inclusive Design, that clearly sets out how, as clients, we should be taking forward inclusive design and where the key points and decisions and standards that we should be considering at each process, a vital tool. And then last year, I think one of the most important pieces of the outcome for me was the new British standard, the revision of BS 8300. It's been around since 2001 and was supported by the government to help implement the Disability Discrimination Act in terms of providing guidance on good practice for design for disabled people. But what we achieved in 2018 was to extend it, so it wasn't just buildings, it was the external environments as well, but also we changed its approach. It became about delivering an accessible and inclusive built environment. It started to integrate master planning principles. We took on board the importance of inclusive design strategy. So the starting point within BS 8300 for the design process is setting out how to deliver a design strategy. It started to broaden our design guidance around neurodiversity, and there's still much work that the British Standard Institute are doing in that area to help deliver research and guidance in that area. But it also started to talk about age, gender, family and faith. So integrating that into though a code of practice, a mainstream document that starting to achieve that real mainstreaming of inclusivity. And then we come on to 2020 and we have the REBA Plan of Works being reissued. And again, it's a significant move forward. I don't expect people to be able to see the detail, but if you just blow up a very small section of the new plan, it shows the project strategies, and within that, it includes inclusive design. So we've now gone through, I think, over an 8-year period from 2012 to 2020, demonstrating how to do it in an informed manner on an incredibly large scale, and then how that is now formalised within the plan of works. And the final tool I want to touch on has been launched this year by CIC, and it's a roadmap for change. I'm looking about where the industry needs to go, and one of the aims of the roadmap is about delivering inclusive and attractive built environments that represent the communities that we serve. And there is a whole section in there on inclusive design, and it's got some key points and pointers to other guidance, such as the CIC's publications, the Design Council's Inclusive Design Hub, the Legacy Development Corporation's work as background information to help organisations not just think about how they deliver inclusive design, but there's a whole raft of information about looking at the diversity of the organisation as well. It's important that, and I think one of the pieces of work I was involved with the Mayor of London was his diversity handbook, and there reflecting that it is very important that the people, the teams delivering the projects actually reflect the communities that are going to be benefiting from these projects, and how diversity and inclusion within the teams and helps inform the decision making, helps inform the understanding, and then the delivery of an inclusive solution at the end of it. That's a very quick whiz through kind of 8 years of time, but I think there is a lot of detail, and British standards go into the minutiae, but I think the important message that I want people to take away is that actually a policy, it has to be at high level, it has to have organisational ownership, and it has to be delivered with the right understanding and skill set within the management of a project, not just within the fine detail and the design reports and the measurements, but actually changing the processes and how we deliver a scheme. Thank you.
One of the questions that people ask me is about a little bit about nomenclature. So what is the difference between inclusive design, accessible design, and universal design?
It's an interesting one, language. I think there is a clear difference between inclusive design and accessible design. Accessible design means it's usable. It means, if we say a very simple one, when we talk about step-free access, we have stairs that are designed so people can use them, and we've got a lift for people who can't use stairs. But if that lift is hidden in a different part of the building and somebody has a different experience, I think one of the challenges, say, around active health is there has been a desire to hide lifts, so force people to use stairs to keep fit. Mm-hmm. Well, actually, that means that all those people who are using the lifts have a negative experience. They feel step-free. So the challenge is how do you encourage people to use stairs while having the lift in the same place? So as people move up and down the building, they have an equal experience. So it's about the quality of how we can use the environment, not just whether it's usable or not. Universal design is based around need and doesn't, for me, have that broader cultural reference. It talks about our cognitive, it talks about reach, and therefore it will touch on age and gender, but it doesn't actually recognise the communities that we work with and that broader notion of inclusion. So it's I think for me, how we've developed our thinking of inclusive design over the last decade has been much further reaching than the core elements of just being accessible or universal.
No, I 100% agree.
Universal kind of, in some respects, suggests that we're all the same. Definitely aren't.
Okay. No, I think it's an important distinction to, get the language right. And I think, especially as a project manager, to think about inclusivity, I'm thinking about how I include everyone rather than just accessibility, which is access for me or access for somebody else.
Yeah.
I know, I 100% agree with that. One of the next questions I had was around your vast experience and how you got involved in inclusive design. So I recently, was involved in a project that was driven by passenger experience at Heathrow, and that led to the team being very, very clued on to special needs and passengers, in wheelchairs with neurodiversity, and so therefore I'd come into that world through that project. But how did you start off?
I was actually project managing an arts resource lottery bid, and I had a very inspiring director who, we were based in North Paddington, one of the most diverse areas of London, and he wanted a building that worked for everybody. This was at the time when the Disability Discrimination Act was just coming out, had no idea what Part M was all about, and he'd bought a copy of Selwyn Goldsmith's Designing for the Disabled and said, right, our building's going to meet this. And it was a very steep learning curve. We employed Centre for Accessible Environments as our access consultants, and I ended up moving and working for Centre for Accessible Environments and running their access consultancy.
And was there a moment you knew that?
Not a straightforward or formal background, but it's given me the opportunity over the years to working at the CAE, to be involved with government bodies and working closely with the Disability Rights Commission, as it then was, and help understand, in detail the legislative framework, but also at the same time working in the commercial world and helping clients understand commercially what the implications are, and working with some very enlightened commercial organisations who also recognise the benefits of being accessible and inclusive, therefore wanting to move forward rather than just tick a box.
100%. And was there a moment in your career where you realised that you were you were really passionate about this and you wanted to keep doing this?
Ever since I got involved with thinking about how people use the environment and the impact the environment has, it became personal when my son was born. My son has muscular dystrophy and is deaf. He has real requirements of the environment to be independent. I suppose that has given it a personal slant, but it's also just seeing the impact your work has on other people's lives is quite. But I suppose on a personal level, my favourite achievement is my son was the first wheelchair user over the O2 Dome, which I was involved with, and we became the trial family to actually see what we could achieve. But also, being in the Olympic Park during the games and just seeing how much people enjoyed it, and how many people were able to access and enjoy the games that more than we'd ever expected, I think.
That was actually going to be my last question, was, do you have a personal story of something? But yeah, you've totally, that's a really, really amazing story, and a huge achievement for your son, being the first one. In your line of work, you obviously come into contact with a lot of project managers and people working on major projects. What conversations do you have with them, and what are their bugbears and questions that they come to you with? What's the most common question, for example?
We have this debate about what standard is applied and how it's applied, and if it's not mandatory, then it doesn't get delivered. So the importance of being able to measure what we're trying to achieve, I think, is a discussion, and trying to challenge people's low expectations of what they should be delivering. I think also, I've worked with some really inspiring people who want to deliver it, and so how then do we come up with the tools to help all of our different teams actually understand what we're trying to deliver? And I think that's where things like the policy and the strategies become important, because they become it's not just a line in the brief somewhere, meet the needs of people or help us comply with the Equality Act. It's actually setting out, we've got a clear vision, a clear design intent. This is what we want you as our teams to deliver and set forward. You need to understand it, and so it's helping people I'm working with understand what helping them understand what we're trying to achieve, I guess.
I think you're 100% right. Quantifying benefits, quantifying it within the business case, and writing that in is something that we really, really do struggle with project managers, and that is the best way to see projects go ahead. And
we are judged on the benefits and what we're delivering. They need to be clearly set out. They need to have a way of reflecting what we are expected to deliver. Clear business case for it is critical.